So last year we had the team from Melbourne, Australia, who was one of the catalysts to kind of kick us off and force us to create this conference, which we're happy for. And we were happy to have Matt Harrison back this year to give us a little update about what they've been up to. They've been very, very busy. Matt is the Associate Professor in Learning Intervention Education at the University of Melbourne. He has experienced teacher in research and digital creator who is an advocate for utilizing technology to support social capacity building. Some of his works include neurodiversity, I'm tongue-tied this morning, inclusive education, and the effects of using digital technologies as teaching and learning tools. At this time, we're going to have Matt join us from his office, I believe his office in Melbourne, and he's going to give us a little update what they've been up to. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Hello, everyone. Wonderful to be here virtually. I'm a bit sad I can't be here in person in Michigan. It's currently midnight in Melbourne right now in Australia. So it's it is late. I've got my assistive cup of coffee with me, but it is an absolute pleasure to be back again. And thank you very much, Chris, for the warm welcome. It's wonderful to see and hear you. So I'm going to just begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians and owners of the lands of Australia and just pay my respects to the elders. One of the wonderful things about Australia is we have 65,000 years of history. And as a teacher, I feel so proud to be able to build on that tradition, 65,000 years of teaching from our First Nations peoples and celebrate their knowledges. So that's just a really exciting starting point for our conversation today. I do like structure, so I'm going to just give you a quick overview I'm going to touch on today, because it's been a wild ride, as Chris alluded to in his introduction. I'm going to briefly introduce myself. I may know some of you. If not, I'll just touch very briefly on who I am and why this journey has been so important to me and to my neurodivergent community. I'm going to talk about my journey working with a group of my neurodivergent colleagues in trying to be creative in how we actually fund programs that are neurodiversity affirming. Because this is a big question around the world, there's all these really wonderful ideas, and how do we bring them to life in a way that's sustainable? I think that's really the key part here. I'm going to talk a little bit about one of my social enterprise that I was lucky enough to start with Jess Rawlings, who is an autistic speech pathologist. And this is really around the idea of reframing what we mean by collaboration and how we celebrate different ways that people want to collaborate together. And then I'm just going to share some of my learnings, personal learnings along the way. I know Michigan's doing amazing work in this space too. And as a massive nerd and gamer, I am a massive gamer, I love it. I do think these journeys are better as multiplayer. And what I mean by that is these collaborations across oceans, across seas. I think I said to Sandy early on, one of the really, really wonderful things about Michigan, and it's a long way away, is but you feel you're at home with people who understand who you are and what you're trying to do. And I think that's something as we, go around the world and find other neurodivergent communities who are advocating for a better way of doing things. I think that's one of the beautiful things about the Beautiful Minds Conference and other conferences like this around the world. It's led by our community and allies who really have their heart and soul in this mission. So I'll talk a little bit what I see as the next steps, and then I'm not sure, we may have time for questions at the end. Just very briefly, I'm a teacher, as Chris introduced, by training. I have been lucky enough to work with kids right from foundation or at that kindergarten through to year 12, and working in Australia, the United Kingdom and South Korea. I'm currently an associate professor in learning intervention. What that means is I work with teachers and school leaders and allied health professionals to find better ways to support all students, but particularly neurodivergent students, in making sure that they're safe, happy, and learning. So my real areas of focus, and I'll talk about this just in a minute, are really this idea of neurodiversity and using digital technologies and digital tools to create a more inclusive education system. part of that was setting up next level collaboration with Jess. The other part, which has been equally important to me, is being one of the co-leaders of the University of Melbourne's neurodiversity project. And this is something that I spoke about last year at Beautiful Minds, but working with Dr. Jess Reardon, working with Dr. Sarah Timperley, and working with a very, very large neurodivergent and neurospicy community, we've been able to really look at how we can create more inclusive higher education for students, for our professional staff, for our academics, how we can remove those barriers and create a place where everyone wants to come to work. I think that's really important. So this time last year, you can see there's a photo. It's the same room almost. And there's Jess speaking very, very articulately and powerfully about her experiences as a neurodivergent woman. And Jess, if you've met Jess, she's incredibly funny. So I think I was laughing through her entire talk last year up on stage with her. But what I think I got from last year, what I definitely got from last year, was meeting other people, as I said, around the world who had this shared passion. And it's just been so exciting. And I think Sandy and team, I've been so inspired by the work that you've done. It's not always easy and you get unexpected roadblocks and barriers, but I think it's just one of those things where together we can actually motivate each other and sort of be, that support network around the world that helps us to get to the next level or the next step. So my interest in social inclusion, this is a photo of myself, my younger brother, with very, very cool bowl cut haircuts. Thanks, Mum, for that. I grew up in a family where, extended family that was neurodivergent, and also, our neighborhood was very diverse as well. And we're one of the first families with in our street with a 286 state-of-the-art 286 computer. And this is sort of late 80s, early 90s. And we used to play games together and share one keyboard and spend hours with kids all huddled around the computer. So when I became a teacher, I thought, oh, look, how did I learn a lot of these teamwork or collaboration skills? And it was through games. And that really inspired me and got me thinking about how I could use strengths and interests to help work with our young people and to be able to do what we call social capacity building in a neurodiversity affirming way. And that was really important to me, was rather than trying to change the neurodivergent young people that I was working with, it was really thinking about how we could do it in a way that celebrated who they were while teaching essential collaboration skills that everyone needs, but teaching them in such a way that they felt comfortable. So as I mentioned earlier, my research has really brought together my professional and personal interests, and I've been so privileged to be able to do this work. Social inclusion is the thing that I really care about, and that is the thing where people feel like they belong, feel like they're safe, feel like they're part of a community. And I see my work in schools very similar to my work in higher education and university. Yes, I'm working with different age groups, and I'm working with, people who are in their 60s and 70s versus, working with 6 and 8-year-olds. But it's the same idea that together we can create a space where everyone feels like they have a place and that they belong and that they can be true to themselves. And that's just so important. So this is a very convoluted way of showing you my journey. You see, in 2020, I'll zoom into the camera for you, Jesse. I currently have very grey hair right now. You can probably see that. Back in 2020, I had far less grey hair. And I think a lot of people who have been at the University of Michigan's neurodiversity project have probably had some more grey hairs as well from trying to wrangle these really ambitious blue sky dreaming projects. And so I've been lucky I've been able to take the research and go through programs like the Translating Research at Melbourne program and the Melbourne Accelerator program to develop next level collaboration as a social enterprise or a spin out company that takes our research and brings it to the market with a social mission at the center of what we do. And that's what I mean by social enterprise. This is finding creative ways to work with industry to fund this vital work that we know is so important to neurodivergent people right around the world. And so when I talk about research impact, yes, I've got, books and publications, but what really excites me is seeing the young people that I work with, in our programs, and seeing the smiles on their faces and hear them talk about the friendships they've developed, and seeing the young neurodivergent adults that we employ to help run our programs. That to me is really research impact. So I think when I talk about what we're doing now, it's been a really good intersection between being lucky, because luck is an element here, having really wonderful supporters and support networks around me, including our leadership at the university, but also having, personally, Professor Lorraine Graham is my mentor and role model, and she has always opened doors for me. And so when I think about next level collaboration, it's not just Jess and myself. There's about a bazillion people who've made this possible. You'll see just in the bottom right-hand corner here, we're on the national news on Friday. We just received a big funding boost investment through our university. And we had this surreal experience of being on a national breakfast show in Australia with myself, Jess Rawlings, my co-founder and our CEO, and one of our young 12-year-olds is in the program. And I'll share later with you, Sandy. You can share across the audience the interview, because the young person was just absolutely phenomenal. I could not add to anything that he said. So if you're looking for a speaker next year, I recommend 12-year-old Henry to come speak to you, because he was just brilliant. So when we talk about inclusive social skills, I'm really just talking about the ways that we can use these skills, these essential skills like listening, taking turns, giving and requesting feedback, but we can do this in a way that allows people the flexibility to be themselves. We're not about changing who these kids are, and that's really, really important. It's allowing them to be using these skills in a way that's essential, that's comfortable to them. So these are some examples of the skills that we teach. These are lifelong skills, finding a compromise. I'm sure everyone knows some adults that they work with where it can be difficult to find a compromise with them. These are things that it's an ongoing mission in our lives to be better at. Sharing task information, recognizing frustration, requesting feedback. And we use a 3-stage structure. So just to give you an idea, I know I'm close to time here. I'm just going to show a short video that explains what our programs do. We can't show footage of the children. So one of our wonderful autistic adults creates Lego animations, and they've created a Lego animation very briefly for you so you can see exactly what happens in our program.
Our next level collaboration sessions follow a 3-stage structure that stays the same each week. Having a predictable structure helps us to know what to expect every time we come into a session, so there are no surprises. We begin our sessions by saying hello to our program leader, program assistant, and the other players before getting ready for Stage A. In Stage A, we learn about collaborative skills that are important for everyone to learn, like giving verbal instructions or offering help to others. Different people might show these skills differently, but what's most important is that we can use these skills however works best for us. During Stage A, we also watch a video of our gameplay from the previous week and talk through the skills that we used in our last session. Then, each team member picks one skill as their goal for the week, and we can start playing. In Stage B, we practice our collaborative skills by playing a weekly cooperative video game, where we have to work together as a team towards a common goal. We play in timed rounds, and between each round, we pause to hear feedback about the skills we have used and how they have helped the team succeed. We also take turns doing different jobs in the game between rounds, and if we get stuck, the program leader and program assistant will coach us to work out a solution or find a way we can ask for help if we need it. For Stage C, we do a guided reflection and talk through the skills we have used while playing our game of the week. We share our ideas on what skills the team used well, what skills the team could use more next time, and how we went with our individual goal skills. At the end of the reflection, we celebrate our collaborator of the week and have some time for free play with our teammates. Our families will arrive at the end of the session, and we say goodbye to the program leader, program assistant, and our teammates before heading home.
So that's really just, we are using lots of different team-based games, and we're using these team-based games to practice these skills in a meaningful context for our young people, and things like promoting leadership and seeing failure as learning rather than punishment. And I think when I step back and think about the neurodiversity project and what we've done at Next Level Collaboration, why does this all matter at the end of the day? And it's this idea of nothing about us without us. It's this quote that I love, the idea that as a neurodivergent community, we do have power, we can come together and we can be, we can self-advocate, but we can also be creative and find ways to get things done. So when I think about what I've learned along the way, the three things that really have really stood out to me is that we need something that will inspire us to get out of bed in the morning, whether that's the University of Michigan Neurodiversity Project, whether it's an idea for a virtual reality program that will help bring neurodivergent people together. It's about how we find ways to socially network together. That inspiration is really important. And finding people who care about what we care about, that community is so, so powerful. And so I just tip my hat to you for organising Beautiful Minds. I think that's a really key part of this. And we can find multiple ways to fund projects. And when you can do that, if you can find different ways of funding things, you can largely do what you want. And I've been very lucky in that regard. We've found creative ways to fund things and be able to stick with our vision. And there are lots of different ways we can fund things. It's not just government grants. It's looking at working with partners, working with industry, finding sponsors, and it's getting a combination so we're not reliant on one source of funding. That's something at the University of Melbourne's Neurodiversity Project we're going through right now, is how do we become sustainable over time? And that's really important to us. Just got some resources. If you're interested, I'll share the slides later on. But thank you very much. I'll leave it there. I know I had 15 minutes. So I don't want to go over time. Should I stop sharing my slides? I think it's probably a good idea if we stop sharing. I can put my my email address up on the screen briefly as well, so people can, if people want to reach out to me as well. I'll stop sharing so I can see everyone. Oh, thank you. I can hear you clapping. That's nice. That's good.
Any questions? You're getting off easy, Matt. I don't know.
No, that's good.
Oh, in the back. Where's my other microphone?
Hi, Pete Wendell, and good to connect. This is amazing progress at University of Melbourne. What was your first kind of, I'll call it, service model or business model that used different sources for funding to be able to get traction? You mentioned we don't just use grants, but where do you consider the first successful shared value creation model that your group started doing to kind of take it beyond just one source?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I was probably about 12 years ago part of a tech startup that was developing peer feedback software for universities, and we spent about 2 years developing software, and we got some small pots of funding from universities, but it wasn't enough to sustain us, and it sort of fizzled out. And the lesson I learned from that was when Jess and I said, let's start Next Level Collaboration, is we actually worked with families, and we found a payment point for families to come and be part of our program through something called the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And that meant that we had revenue for Next Level, even when we were just bootstrapping out of a library. We had revenue coming in from day one. And even though it was small amounts of revenue, what that showed is for our university leaders that there was a pathway to sustainability. And that was really important, because when we went, with our hands out saying, hey, this is a social mission. We want to be able to improve the way we're doing neurodiversity affirming programs for young people and to be able to hire adults. They could see that we're already thinking about how we're going to, when the tap turned off from the university, how we're going to keep going. So I think getting revenue from day one and working for small amounts of money with families, and then having a subsidy system for families who couldn't afford that, that was really pivotal for us in showing that we're serious about this being a long-lasting venture. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. We have another question. Okay, 2 questions. One is, what is the kitty's name? And 2, how do you select the games that you utilize in your programs?
Yeah. The kitty's name is Professor Einstein Cuddlesworth. He is our cat. He's also the head of HR for Next Level Collaboration. I wouldn't want to be on his wrong side. He can be quite grumpy, our cat Einstein. The second question around the games, we, as part of my PhD research, we identified 39 principles of game design that create the conditions where players are going to work together in what we call productive ways. And so using those principles, we actually go through and assess games, commercially developed games. And we've got about 60 different titles we use right now. If you send me an email, sorry, I didn't catch your name. If you send me an email, I can send you just a list of some of the games we use and just why we choose those games, if that helps.
Thank you.
We
No
actually
worries,
have
my pleasure.
a follow-up question. Have there been any games or engaging practices that you found in your experiences to be most trauma-informed or appropriate for healing and wellness?
Yeah, really, that's a wonderful question. We found some of the game design principles, the games that have timers or have some sort of set limit can cause a lot of pressure. And particularly talk about trauma-informed, the idea of just stepping back and giving people space was really important. So there's a game, a wonderful game, it's actually developed in Melbourne called Untitled Goose Game. I don't know if anyone's played it, but it's, I see Jesse's nodding, that's good. You play as 2 geese and your idea is to cause chaos, and my young people love it. You work together to sort of go around and complete a series of tasks, but you can't die, there's no timer, there's no fail state, and that's one of those games that we would use when we've got a young person who's really dysregulated, or they've had a bad day at school, or they've just have a very sensitive sort of profile. A game like that can be really helpful to sort of get them feeling safe, feeling comfortable, having a laugh with someone else, and building relationships with some of our adults. We'll play with them, and then we can transition them to higher pressure games. I think the trauma-informed question is a really interesting one. I think that's something we need to do more research around. I hope that answered the question. It's good. I can see Jesse in the chat. Many hours, that's great.
I was wondering if you've investigated or thought about using VR games, and if you had any names of games that we might want to use from that genre.
Yeah, it's really interesting. VR is a space that I have explored and we've experimented, and we found some really, powerful enablers, and we found some barriers that, with hindsight, we should have seen. Most of the young people that I work with, not all, but most, are autistic. And I'll just quickly talk about an enabler, a barrier that we experienced early on and still do experience, is if you're using like one of the Meta Quests or any other model now with the, it's a wireless sort of motion-based controls for our young people who stim, who flap to self-regulate when they're happy, when they're upset, or that body stim, they find, and particularly with VR, can quite an overwhelming experience. We found that that the young people we're working with couldn't stim to regulate their emotional state. So they were becoming quite frustrated because it was exiting out of the game, or it wasn't allowing them to play while they were stimming and excited. So sort of this big loop of them stuck in this really stimulating experience, needing to self-regulate, and then the actual user interface of the system not take into account that someone may be stimming, having a physical stim. What was really interesting is that one of our young people suggested there should be a stim mode built into the Meta OS system. I thought that's really good, having some sort of button you can hold down when you're stimming or something, which won't adjust, won't change what's happening in the game. In terms of enablers with VR, I've got to be honest, the most effective use case I've had is actually been with teachers. Using some of like Stanford's autism simulator. It's created by an autistic man, and it was early on when it was like Oculus. It was like Oculus Quest or the original Rift, that was tethered. But using that with teachers to explain what sensory differences can feel like. And of course, this is created by one person, so it's one person's experiences. But even just having teachers go into that world and seeing what it's like to have sensory differences and to experience sensory overwhelm, that was really powerful, because as a learning and teaching tool, it helped our teachers to empathize with the young people which they're working and to understand, hey, this is pretty overwhelming. This is a lot. And it actually helped to change mindsets, which I found fascinating in itself. They go back to their classroom and they go, oh, hang on, that ticking clock is probably driving someone bananas, or, something else in my room, the light sources, or just, all these different things. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Okay, we have no more questions. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And I hope you have a wonderful conference, and I'll see you soon.
So I'm going to introduce now Erik, and I'm going to butcher this name. I apologize, Erik. Robeznieks? Did I get it? Hey, all right. Erik works at Adaptive Sports here at the University of Michigan for the past decade. He was formerly with Wheelchair Basketball of Canada, managing the operation for their national program. He then completed a master's in business administration at the Toronto Metropolitan University in Toronto, and that included his thesis examining the potential inclusion of adaptive sports in the NCAA. Erik has worked with adaptive sports and fitness at the University of Michigan for the past 5 years, supporting the mission, vision, and growth of adaptive sports and fitness initiatives within the University of Michigan and the broader adaptive sport landscape at the local, state, and national level. And I just want to tell you, if you haven't been to adaptive sports, Sandy and I went and saw one of their open gym nights. This is the most supportive community we have ever seen. There were people who have never been in a wheelchair before. They were encouraged to get in. They were encouraged the whole time, no matter how badly they messed up or what cones they hit or anything like that. This is the most amazing community. So please get out and see one of their basketball games, or on Tuesday nights, I think you guys have an open gym people can come and watch. Please get out there and watch. They're at the Coliseum down on South Campus. Erik?
Good morning, everybody. How are we all doing today? Awesome. Thank you so much for having me here, Sandy, for the invitation, and thank you all for having me here this morning. Excited to be talking about adaptive sports and fitness, but something that was really front of mind for me at the forefront of when I first received this invitation to be speaking here this morning is the idea of what is a beautiful mind. And something that jumps to the forefront for me is this concept of individuality, of understanding that at an individual, person-to-person, human level, the way in which we perceive, the way in which we problem solve, the way that we approach the world that we interact with, whether it's academia or extracurriculars or the professional environment, it's shaped by a whole number of factors in terms of, one, how do we operate as people? What are the neurological components of what makes us tick and how we perceive the world around us, but also the environmental factors that shape us, that define us, that mold our characteristics, our traits, our individuality. So as I start to think about that more, it becomes a bi-directional effect. There's an individual level to this. There's a macro level to this. There's a systematic level to this. And both necessitate influence in either direction. But what we have come to understand, what we know and what we can appreciate and why we're all here is that there are systems, there's policies, there's law, there's preferred methods of teaching, or perhaps how the work environment is structured, whether it's the furniture or times of work or whatever it may be, that benefit or perhaps cater or have heuristics that are preferential towards perhaps one way or maybe a few ways of approaching thought and problem solving and communication and interaction, culture, values, beliefs. So when we think about beautiful minds and individuality in that way, and we start to think about the concepts of adaptive sports, there's a lot of comparisons. And I think that this connects beautifully in a lot of ways to what we're trying to do and what we are doing within adaptive sports and fitness. Because very much what we're trying to accomplish is support that individuality of understanding what it takes to provide people the resources, the tools, the equipment, the rules, policies that then support their ability to participate in sport. But before I get into that a little bit further, I think it's important to acknowledge and explore a little bit of the sociocultural history of sport, whether it's the United States, whether it's globally. When you look at the origin of sport, there are certain characteristics that come to mind in terms of how we define someone or how we think of someone as an athlete. Perhaps words come to mind like strong, powerful, fast, tall, quick, agile. Perhaps things come to mind like mental toughness and resiliency. Now, as I go through those characteristics and traits that I just listed and that some people will think of themselves as well, is you perhaps have a certain person that comes to mind, or maybe a group of people that comes to mind. That might be based on what you see on social media or on TV, what you read in history books or textbooks, what you experience firsthand in terms of the spaces that you occupied, whether it's recess or the playground, gym class, sports teams, whatever it may be. More often than not, what people think of when they think about those physical traits of what it means to be an athlete and play sport is perhaps very narrowly minded, and that's rooted within our cultural history of viewing sport as a very masculine, able-bodied endeavor. So when we think about something like adaptive sport, it very much presents this notion of adaptive sport, well, that's an oxymoron. How can one be disabled, yet exhibit the traits that are then required to perform all the things that I mentioned of being fast, being powerful, being strong, being mentally tough? Well, to how I started this talk this morning, there's an individual component of this and there's a macro level component to this, but much more nuanced and something that we explore within adaptive sports and fitness and how we operate our programming and choose the initiatives that we support is based on this concept of socio-ecological model of health, of understanding that our choices, the way that we perceive, the things that we do, the actions that we take, who we are as people is defined at an individual level, it's defined at an interpersonal level, it's defined at a community or societal level, but also at an institutional level. They're all nested within each other. They're all bi-directional in terms of how they influence each other. The people that we interact with shape and define our self-efficacy. The teachers that we encounter, the medical professionals, doctors, physicians, professionals within the world that we interact with, they define what we can and can't do in some ways based on the cultural and social values that are put forward, that are celebrated, that are endorsed. And at a policy and legal level, when you look at broader society, that also defines and narrows the degrees of freedom that are then available to people in terms of the things that they can pursue and thrive in and succeed in. So when we think about adaptive sports and fitness here at University of Michigan, our original mission, our original goal was to create a program, to create an environment such that people with disabilities could engage in sport, whether that's recreationally or whether that's competitively. But to create a program like that without addressing the fact that there are so many of those sociocultural barriers, social determinants of health, cultural barriers that exist, you can't have the program and the people participating if you don't address the root cause of the problem. So what we have done, we've targeted a number of ways in which we can have grassroots level effect, we can have statewide effect, we can have national level impact, such that it creates and facilitates opportunities for all people to be involved in sport. I think a perfect example of this is our Adaptive Sport and Inclusive Recreation Initiative. And this is almost birthed from our interactions with the athletes that did, at the time, participate in adaptive sports and fitness here at University of Michigan. We had student athletes that would recount stories of how they were introduced to sport, but also not introduced to sport. And actually what was more common was that people with disabilities that were participating in our program at the university level, a lot of them, it was their first time ever experiencing organized sport. It was the first time ever that they were supported in their ability to pursue competitive sport and explore all the different realms of potential that they maybe didn't know that they had. And why? It's because at the K-12 level, they were being kind of reinforced with the notion that disability somehow equates to inability. But that's not necessarily a problem that you can pin on a teacher or a school board. It's a fact that there's no formal mechanism in which how people are educated to then create learning environments that are inclusive of people with disabilities. And not just physical, but we're talking about physical and intellectual. We're talking about neurodivergence. We're talking about everyone. Because when we think about sport and the principle of what that looks like recreationally at the K-12 level, whether it's recess and unstructured play, or whether that's in the physical education curriculum, there are ways in which we can create an environment, there are ways in which we can support students in their access to be able to play, to be able to be part of a community that's larger than themselves. So specifically with this initiative, we looked at the physical education curriculum in Michigan and saw that there's a set of standards of being able to get from point A to point B, throw an object with accuracy, achieve an objective with a team. Nowhere within the state learning standards for K-12 education does it say you have to do that playing standing up, that you have to play dodgeball, that you have to do sports that might not necessarily be inclusive of all types of people. You can achieve those same learning standards, however, by playing sports like sitting volleyball, by playing sports like wheelchair basketball, because fundamentally that is still physical literacy, that is still movement. But now instead of children with disabilities being relegated to sitting on the sidelines, now they're meaningfully integrated within the physical education curriculum, within the school setting, that has not just a personal impact, has an interpersonal impact, and has an impact across the entire school environment. Now, a lot of people ask, is this just for people with physical disabilities? No, it is not. When we think about adaptive sport and how we define it at the University of Michigan, it's about the modification of rules or equipment that allows for equitable participation for all people. Simply put, universal design. And when we think about adaptive sport in that way, it's for everyone. We have a very simple saying that we use as well, is if you can sit, you can play. So when we look at adaptive sports and what that application looks like in the real world, what we're doing is individualized accommodation. We're doing individualized accommodation that supports the individuality that people bring to the environment, not forcing them to change and adapt to the environment that we would like. So when we have done this work across the board in K-12 schools, so far within Ann Arbor and currently expanding to Ypsilanti, Saline, and hopefully other school districts as well, and hopefully which will result in statewide level change, there's been a profound impact that we've recorded through data collection, monitoring, evaluation, but there is one pinpointed memory that I recall that really stands out to me in terms of the importance of this work. Part of our intervention that we do within the public school system, we do assemblies at all the schools and talk about the importance of adaptive sports and why all kids are going to get to try this and do this within their physical education setting, and talked about the importance of individualized accommodation and giving people resources they need to be successful. I had a 6th grade student come up to me after the assembly in sort of a sheepish way and said, I have ADHD. I need accommodations so I can read and focus in class. And sometimes that means I need to work in another classroom to be able to get my tests done. And sometimes it's very hard for people to understand me and why I do that. But what you shared made me feel seen. And that was incredibly profound because that was not necessarily the direct intended impact that we were going to necessarily have that day or that we planned on having that day. We were there to talk about adaptive sports, wheelchair basketball, wheelchair tennis, sitting volleyball, goalball. But the way in which we deliver the programming in a very intentional way is supportive of, again, not just people with physical disabilities, but this is creating intentionally inclusive change across the board within the system such that people now perceive each other in a different way. People value the individuality that is now brought to programming, that is now brought to school, that is now brought to the workplace. So why is all of this important? Why should we care? We do programming that's competitive and recreational. Sure, we do schools programming, drop-in programming. Why does sports matter? It's about being part of something that's bigger than yourself. It's being connected to peers. It's being connected to coaches. It's being connected to people that are now serving as role models for what you can aspire to be. We know that there's physical health benefits. We know that there's mental health benefits. And even reading through some of the posters here in the room today, we know that specifically for various types of disabilities and various types of neurodivergent identities, that there's benefits when it comes to behavioral regulation and mental regulation. That there's impact for people with ADHD as an alternative or supplement to medication type treatments. That there's profound impact that sport has in terms of the participation and that sense of belonging at so many different levels that we still need to research and identify. But I think most importantly, through sport, there's a universal language that I think cuts across all aspects of society here within University of Michigan, United States, and internationally as well, is that there's a mutual love that we have as humans for being active, for moving, whatever that movement might look like. So through adaptive sports and fitness, yes, we might have games at Chrysler Center for wheelchair basketball, but it's much deeper than that. There's system level, policy level impact that we can have through our programming such that we're having effect at the individual, interpersonal, societal, and cultural level. So thank you all for listening here this morning as I shared about adaptive sports and fitness. If you'd love to get connected with us, we are part of a larger unit, Student Accessibility and Accommodation Services here at the University of Michigan, and we'd be happy to connect, whether it's for informational sessions or programming or clinics. And thank you again for having me this morning. I can take a question or two if people are interested.
Thank you for thank you for sharing that. What are some of the biggest, I guess, hurdles or challenges that you face today in being able to scale the adaptive sport?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. There's a number of barriers, and what we've actually done in terms of creating our mission for our program is actually identifying those barriers and labeling them as our kind of action plan within our mission. So our mission as ASF, the acronyms, we love them at Michigan, is to increase awareness, knowledge, access, and participation to adaptive sports among people with and without physical disabilities. So when we think about those 4 key terms that I identified, awareness, not a lot of people know about adaptive sports. So presentations like this, work in the public schools, We do work with physical rehab clinics in the medical school and in the healthcare system, whether it's engagement with the student body and other guest lectures or opportunities to invite people in, to overall increase awareness of the fact that adaptive sport exists, and this is something that anyone can be a part of. There's also a gap when it comes to coaching and industry professionals that can support such programming, which then gets us to knowledge, is supporting the drive and growth of information and technical knowledge that is then available for people for how to start programs, how to lead programming, how to train the trainer and teach other professionals to do such activities. When we look at participation and access, we have a number of programs that specifically address that. So our K-12 initiative that I talked about. We have another initiative called Prescription to Play, where we work with healthcare providers and medical students to then talk about how they can intentionally then quite literally prescribe play to the patients that they see that could then access adaptive sport programming that exists within our local region. We also launched an equipment loan program, because a big barrier to participation in sport, whether you're able-bodied or not, is the cost of equipment and that socioeconomic barrier that exists. So we created an equipment loan program that is accessible to all people of Washtenaw County, such that they can loan equipment from us at minimal to free cost to be able to try adaptive sports and be physically active within their community. We also work at a kind of larger kind of policy or state and national level with bodies like the U.S. Department of State, where we're part of their Global Sport Mentorship Program, which supports the overall domestic and international development of adaptive sport, not just within the U.S., but in other countries that are trying to advance disability rights and access to physical activity. We work with national governing bodies like Move United and the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee and the NCAA to then find ways to integrate and include adaptive sport within the able-bodied environment and specifically within NCAA sport. And kind of anecdotally on that, one of the most, among the many profound impacts that this program has is when our athletes are able to train in the same facilities as their able-bodied peers here at the University of Michigan, because there is a non-communicative impact that happens when you have a varsity athlete that trains alongside a varsity adaptive athlete, in that mutual respect that they then gain for one another by sharing that space together, knowing the hardship that is endured of being a high performance athlete, regardless of what sport you play, regardless of how you move. So those are just some of the examples in which we're providing programming, but intentionally working with various bodies, whether it's regionally, state, federally, to then not just provide programming here within the University of Michigan, but find ways to leverage what we've created and the structure that we've created such that it can be scaled and replicated in other areas of the country. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I have a question. As community members, is there an ask you have for us? Is there something we can do to help you and your program expand further?
Thank you. Great question. I think there's a number of ways in which kind of the general community can support this overall initiative. And what we're trying to do is, one, we do from time to time have the ability to host public events. We never charge for our events for spectators. So bringing people in to witness and see adaptive sport, I think is incredibly transformational of being able to actually tangibly see what we're talking about, whether it's track and field or tennis or wheelchair basketball. And specifically to that, on June 28th at the University of Michigan Track and Field Stadium, we will be hosting our second Miller Family Open. This is our home adaptive track and field meet. But what's unique about this event, and building off what we did last year, is that we specifically designed and delivered this event in a way that demonstrates that you can do high performance competitive sport programming that is inclusive of all people. So the Miller Family Open, June 28th, it's going to feature competition of athletes with physical disabilities. It's going to integrate athletes with intellectual disabilities, and it's also going to integrate athletes without any disabilities. Because in the sport of track and field, by adding events, adding heats, you can bring people together in a way such that they're competing amongst their peers where equitable competition can exist, able-bodied versus able-bodied, physically disabled versus physically disabled, intellectual disabilities all together. But you can do so in an environment that brings everyone together in the same place in the same time. It was phenomenal last year to see the camaraderie that formed as a result of that event, of bringing so many diverse groups together in the same place in the same time, all for the love of sport and track and field. So that's an event that I would love to see people to come out to and support. And specifically as well, when it comes to programming here within the University of Michigan and what we're doing, there's overall a lack of research. And I know that this is also a very kind of research heavy conference, and there's a lot of research people within this room, is that I can, based on some of the data that we've been able to collect in our few years of programming, we can speak to some of the impacts that happen at the individual and kind of community level when you integrate adaptive sport programming. But it's very largely an unresearched field, adaptive sport. We know how sport supports people without disabilities and the impacts and kind of whether it's a sociocultural lens or whether it's a sport performance lens. But we have to validate or justify a lot of the work that we do by drawing comparisons from the able-bodied community and applying it to the disabled community, which does not translate well all of the time. So there's a lot of need for research, and I loved seeing a couple posters in there about yoga and karate and other physical activity programs and mindfulness programs and how that actually does translate to benefits for people with neurodivergence in the disabled community. So support and research is definitely greatly needed in the intersection of all specialties. So.
Okay, let's thank Erik one more time.
Thank you.